Greetings, everybody. Welcome to TV Skywriter. The show was delayed by 2 hours, but we are now here. I'm Pat Murray, your host, speaking to you from Durham, North Carolina. My guest, Wade Thames, is in California. I can never remember what city you're in, Wade. What city?
Well, I'm actually near Pasadena, but I'm actually in the city of San Gabriel,
Okay.
which is it's only about 40,000.
That's
People.
all.
Yeah, that's all.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a pretty good size. I mean, it sounds real manageable.
Yeah.
Unlike the city we're both from, which is Chicago.
Right. Yeah, very different.
Boy, oh boy. Well,
Yeah.
Durham has about, I think, 200,000 people, and to me, it's a very manageable size in terms of fighting the urban problems that we have. They all seem to be solvable.
Right.
Is that a word? Solvable? Because of the size of the city, and of course, you have to have the resolve to fix the urban problems that you have. But Durham is really good at meeting the problems that head on.
Right.
Okay, now Wade Thames is a jazz guitarist. That's not what you do for a living, but we all met as young adults while still living in Chicago because we love jazz.
Right.
You and Sylvester, our friend, the late Sylvester Arnold Sr., who
Right.
played keyboards, guitar, bass, and what else? I don't even know. He was always the first to have the newest gadget, the little drum machines and the little this and that.
Yeah. You know what? I remember Sylvester. I wasn't really into the electronic side of music, and I remember he had that first drum machine, drum tricks or something like that. I forgot what it's called.
Actually, it was called Dramatix. I remember
Okay, right, yeah, something like that. Yeah.
I remember stumbling over the name because it looked like Dramatix. Then I realized, it's Dramatix. Very clever little name there.
Right, yeah, I remember that, and I think you have to even like what they call step time the drums in, and he was into that. And he was the first one that I remember, just going back way back, and he was always just a kind of guy that was whatever was new, he would experiment with it and figure out how he can incorporate it in what he was doing. So
definitely, he was into Frank Zappa. He was one of the few folks I knew who actually believed in the total marriage of rock and jazz, and R&B to a certain extent, R&B as well, and a little bit of Latin because he was intrigued by the Brazilian music that I was playing.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and just such as myself, I mean, a lot of people that came up in our era really didn't say, well, this is jazz, this is R&B, this is rock, and say, and really separate the two. It was just all music, in the sense of just playing that style or whatever. But
that's why I think it's so weird, the jazz versus smooth jazz battle. I think people in our generation, at least black folks in our generation, at least where we're from, the music that was a precursor to smooth jazz was not looked down upon. In fact, when you had like family reunions and picnics and stuff, that was the kind of music that could bring all the generations together. And the music I'm talking about, of course, there was no Keiko Matsui and Bob Baldwin back then, and and Kenny G. And those people didn't exist. Well, they might have existed, but music I'm talking about Roy Ayers.
Right.
George Benson, George Duke, Gato Barbieri, Eddie Palmieri, people like that.
Right.
And they weren't thought of as being lesser musicians than the other folks we enjoyed, like Sonny Stitt, Wes Montgomery, Charles Mingus, Thelonious Monk, those people.
Right. And I enjoyed the fact later on I found out that all those musicians that you named, they were all connected to each other somehow, and even though they were in what you may say is slightly different genres, they, for example, the collaboration of Grover Washington and Kenny Burrell. I mean,
wait a minute, I didn't know about that one.
Oh yeah, yeah. They made a couple of albums together. And I found out that Grover Washington was very much a straight ahead player, you know, in mainstream jazz at one time. And
Oh,
you know,
I have some of the music that he recorded as a straight head artist, and also,
right,
George Duke did a lot of straight ahead stuff. To me, and I don't want to sound judgmental, but it seems to me that the real musicians can handle both jazz and smooth jazz, and that a lot of people have come along later now that smooth jazz has been coined as a phrase, and they only know how to play smooth jazz. I shouldn't say that's such a bad thing,
no, no,
but it's not a bad thing really. It's just that people just don't know always the potential and what all these musicians can really do when they're not recording, when they're playing in clubs or playing along with other musicians. You really don't know how good they are sometimes, and I guess it's kind of bad to kind of judge them by their commercial output. Is all I'm trying to say.
right, right. Well, I mean, the person is probably at the highest order of all that, and I mean, in terms of guitar players, is probably George Benson, and I think his so-called smooth jazz commercial, whatever you want to, what label you want to put on it, is just as good as anything he did that was considered straight ahead or more serious or whatever you want to label that. It was just, it was quality music either way. It was just trying to appeal to a different audience, even though across those two different styles, George Benson was able to put his signature, you know, just the same, and it was great music. I mean, I had a conversation with someone about it was the I actually have that group in Facebook called Jazz Guitar Society, and one of the guys posted a song from my album called Body Talk, and I know you remember that one.
It's either A&M or CTI.
It's CTI.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff, I mean, the rhythms on it really sounds like out and out James Brown. You know, it's like it's funky. You know,
Oh yeah.
and it's but George is George. I mean, he's playing his stuff. He's playing the way he plays. And
I think remember when Breezin' came out in the late 70s or mid 70s? I was in college, so
right.
And I was going to Talladega College in rural Alabama, and when it came out, it was quite a hit, I remember. And I used to subscribe to Downbeat magazine because I needed to read about jazz. I was in rural Alabama, and I was had my jazz fix on all the time. I remember the writers in Downbeat were very upset, and I was amused because most of the writers, at least back then, were white, and whenever they would have a new writer, they'd always tell us what his or her background was, and it was usually a person from rural Midwest.
Right.
And I didn't get the sense that they really knew people like the artists they were writing about. And they were always so incensed when someone sold out. Not really thinking that these people have to pay bills and they're living real lives like the rest of us. In fact, I remember later, George Benson was being interviewed on TV, and he said when he was playing straight ahead jazz, mostly one-nighters, and they're going from city to city alone, usually from club to club, playing with pickup bands. And that's kind of a tough life. I mean, it sounds like fun to me, but I know it's a tough life really to actually do that and be away from your family. He said he totally lost out not seeing his children grow up. And he said with his second set of children that he was bringing up after the release of Breezin', which brought him lots of money and fame, he said he was not going to miss out on seeing his kids grow up. And I thought to me, that's a good enough reason to go out and make money, in my opinion.
I mean, you can broaden the spectrum and still be within yourself, and it's not, to me, it's not like making any one type of music less than another. It's just that okay, if I want to appeal to certain people that listen to a certain style, I need to broaden what I play and put it in that area. And there's nothing wrong with that. I hear it was a funny thing I read actually on the internet one time that I think kind of sums it up. The so-called straight ahead jazz community, or people who call themselves part of it. I'm not going to blame that on anyone that plays straight ahead, but some people were always blaming George Benson for being a sellout, years ago, but then again, he did what he had to do, and he didn't compromise his integrity as far as he's playing music, and he's doing it, as a living. So just like any job someone else had, they had to make themselves marketable, in the job market, and that's what he did with his work. So
he probably had to. Now, I don't know any of these people personally at all, but
right.
I think I remember reading or hearing that I don't know if both of his parents were murdered. I know for sure his father was, and they never found him.
Okay.
I don't know if his mom was murdered too. I'm not sure. I mean, I shouldn't even be talking about this stuff. All I'm trying to say is an adult has to do what he's got to do. I mean, you got a family, you got to protect them. I know he moved his family to another state. You just have to do, I mean, even if you're a famous jazz musician, you have to raise your kids. You have to have, if you have a family, you have to take care of your family.
Right.
If that means you have to sell records, well, sell records.
Well, and it's really not a lot of money in making recording, especially now. Because I remember years ago, I knew Clifford Brown's widow, LaRue Brown, and this was years ago in the 80s, and we were talking, and I said, man, wouldn't it have been wonderful if Clifford Brown would have played with Charlie Parker? And she said, oh, they did, and
wow.
And I said, there's recordings, and she said, yes, they recorded together. And I said, well, who has it? She said, I have it.
Oh, my goodness.
And I said, well, are you ever going to release it? And she said, no. She said, I'm going to leave it all up to Clifford Jr.
Where's Clifford Jr.?
He's a, last I know him is he's a disc jockey in the Bay Area, San Francisco.
Wow. You think that he's one of those release?
Huh?
You said he passed
away. Lulu Watson Brown was her name at the time when I met her. Mm-hmm. She had remarried. She said, I'm gonna leave it up to my lawyers and Clifford Jr. So.
Okay.
And so I don't know. Huh?
So who passed away? She passed away, or he passed away?
No, she passed away.
Oh.
Maybe 10 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the last time I talked to her. But she told me about this maybe in the 80s sometime. It was like early 80s.
That's another musician, Charlie Parker. People, now this is way before, I think, my time and your time, I believe. People were really criticizing him, saying that he was selling out when he made that Charlie Parker with Strings album, which I actually like a lot.
Right. That was a great record. Yeah, and that's
But I read that he needed. Strangely enough, he needed money to pay bills and whatnot. I guess we all do as adults, right?
Right. Well, it's just like even Wes, that the stuff he did on A&M, and I recently heard some live sessions where Wes was playing, and it was during his A&M period where he and his brothers, they were playing all those tunes like Wendy, and
I love when they would play pop tunes.
Right, and they were making it their own. They were making it hip, and they were playing it, and I dug it just the same, like I did, the stuff he did on Incredible Jazz Guitar, or or any of the so-called straight ahead stuff. It was just as cool because he was playing, you know.
Well, to me, now, when it comes to Wes Montgomery, and actually A&M was to me just as important as Blue Note and Motown growing up, and I'm sure it's the same for you. But growing up listening to jazz, we grew up in what I would say a jazz household. I didn't hear a lot of these Beatles and other pop tunes by the original artists sometimes until I grew up. There were several Beatles tunes that I never heard by the Beatles, but heard them first by people like Wes Montgomery, Sergio Mendes, and all these other groups. And, grew up hearing it by Sergio Mendes and whatnot, then later heard by the Beatles, and I was like, ooh, that's not really very good. But
oh yeah, well, the tune. For me,
I love the Beatles. Don't get me wrong, but sometimes I felt, well, they should have written the songs and just handed them straight to Wes. That's just me. That's just me.
For years, I heard most of the Beatles tunes, and but I'm gonna tell you, there was one that kind of escaped me for years because maybe I never had the album or whatever, but the tune "A Day in a Life," and I always heard Wes's version.
I can only think of Wes's version. I don't remember hearing it.
Oh man, I mean, because the way Wes played, it was a minor thing, and it was very cool and bluesy. But when I finally heard the Beatles version, I was like, it was in a major key, and I was like, what?
Really?
But I mean, not taking the Beatles, away from them. I mean, it was a hit record,
right? Yeah.
But I was expecting, Wes had that kind of blue sound that it was a different thing. So
I think that's the tune. I was reading about Wes Montgomery, and I think that's the tune where he said that he had never heard the original before, and they didn't want him to hear the original. They wanted him to put himself into the tune. And in fact, I think a lot of the pop tunes that Wes and some of these musicians recorded, they might not have heard it by the original.
Yeah, I know before the CTI, I think I heard an interview where they said they brought him the 45 of Little Anthony Imperial's Going Out of My Head, and they played it for him, the whoever the producer was on that one, and he said, the tune is called "You Going Out of My Head," and he said, if you think I'm gonna play that, you going out of your head.
I guess the producer was Creed Taylor, right?
Yeah. And they finally convinced him to do it, and of course.
Maybe that's why they didn't want him to hear "A Day in the Life" by the Beatles.
Right.
Maybe that's the reason. I don't know.
Right. Well,
but Sergio Mendes did "Going Out of My Head" too. That was a hit for Brazil '66.
But I think, every generation probably he was playing the pop tunes of his generation, and so he looked at it differently. I mean, he looked at it like, oh, these are great tunes because that's from his memory, his childhood when he went to dances, things like that. And then the things of today, of that time, rather,
mm-hmm.
He probably thinks of it like I think of my daughter's tunes. I listen to those songs and I say, oh, God,
Yeah, so I bring you the music. Yeah, we want you to do a jazz version of this tune by Jay-Z.
Right. Well,
although you could probably do it.
Right. I've heard some things, though, that my daughter's listened to, that she actually listened to. And I said, yeah, there's something there, And I remember when she was real small, it was this, she liked this, it was this movie came out, it was called The Polar Express. And there was a tune on there that I really like. I forgot the name of it. When Christmas comes around. When Christmas time comes around. It's a nice tune. And then I learned it and I started playing it. And she was always wanting me to play that song, It was when she was like 5 or 6 or something like that.
Did you jazz it up for her? Or?
Yeah, I jazzed it up. It's got nice changes. I mean, it's got a nice melody and you can put some nice changes to it. And
put it up on YouTube.
yeah. But you know, there's tunes that are being written that are that they have to have a melody that, if you really think about it, some songs, and we I think we talked about this before. Some songs today, like some of the songs by, say, Mariah Carey or Alicia Keys, and I'm not, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to slight them in any way, but sometimes the performance is stronger than the song itself.
Oh, absolutely, sure. That's always been true for me. Some music.
Right. Where, see, if I can take that song and I can play it on my instrument, and it has a, or someone to sing it that's not such a great singer, and it still stands up.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some of the things that you may hear some of these vocalists do, it sounds so great because they're such great singers or vocalists themselves. The performance is outstanding. But if you just sit down at the piano and you play that melody, you say, there's really not a lot there, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So
I've seen videos where you totally enjoy the video, and then you listen to the song without the visual stimulus, and it's like, oh, that's not even a good song, is it?
Right.
But like you said, the performance sometimes can carry.
It carries.
Yeah, it carries the song, and then you realize. But then sometimes I've heard songs like Buddy Holly had a song called can't think of it. I'll think of it in a minute. But Buddy Holly did a song that I just never liked, and I never really liked Buddy Holly that much. I mean, he's okay, I guess. But there's a song that he did that I just totally never liked growing up. Always heard it. Then James Taylor covered it, and I guess he heard something about it that really appealed to him, and he transformed the song and made it a great song. I just can't think of the name of it right now. Mm-hmm. But sometimes there's something there in a song, and you don't think it's much of a song at all. But a good musician can grab it and find what's good in it and really make it great.
Right. Well, here's a classic example, even another song, of course, my daughter loves, she's 13, and what's the lady, Poker Face, what's this, I forgot.
Lady Gaga?
Lady Gaga, yeah. Lady Gaga. See, I'm showing my age. I'm so unhip. But
I just thought you were going to naturally mention One Direction.
Yeah, but Lady Gaga, and then this song is old. It's, you know, been out a few years, but I remember hearing it and I was like, I don't like that, you know. But then my daughter was into this show Glee, and she was watching it, and it's you know, like it's a musical kind of sitcom, and you know, it's all about song. Mm-hmm. And I watched it with her one time, and they performed, you know, Poker Face, and they actually sung it a cappella, no music. And the young lady that performed, I listened to it and I said, it's a good song. That's a really good song. And she was like, see, you know, it's a good song. But I think the treatment of it, the production of it, the way they did to make it to have the pop appeal for Lady Gaga. And Lady Gaga, I found out later on after I've seen her perform sitting at a piano singing, she's actually very good also. But the treatment of that tune was so popish and watered down, it just, you know, didn't appeal to me. And that's just me, you know. But the song itself is for what it's trying to be. And I always say, nothing's a failure until it fails to be what's its intent, what's it's trying to be. Is if it falls short of that, then it's a failure. So, and I think it's in the essence of the tune is there, you know. So,
do you think some musicians, in order to be popular, play below their capabilities?
Well, I don't know if there's anything like that, in the sense that it always looked, my example of the complete musician is Quincy Jones. He's taken his career all the way through a lot of things, and so at the time when Quincy Jones was doing film scores, and television scores, he actually was doing pop records, like even like one of his first things, like "It's My Party," which a lot of people don't know about.
You mean
Which
Leslie Gore?
Yeah, that was like Quincy Jones. Maybe someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's the tune. Quincy Jones actually did the production on that, and
Oh,
I
okay.
think he was
Huh.
doing film scores for serious movies and television scores all that time. But he said someone approached him and said, "Could you do a pop record?" And he totally changed his thing around. You have to put on a different hat, it's a different type of music. It takes a different approach, but it's still the element of well, it's music, and then it's there's a bigger picture, it's entertainment, and so you have to wrap your head around that
Hmm.
and say, I have to get in this mode and write something and produce something that will work that appeals to this market, and he did it.
Yeah.
So
Well, the reason I asked that is because I'm just throwing names out. I don't mean to offend anyone, but there is a I shouldn't even mention his name. Okay, I will. Okay. I used to really love the music of Lee Ritenour. I still do, actually. I mean, he's a great guitarist. I first heard him, I think, on a Marcio Santos album back in like early '70s or whatever. Um, he's one of the few artists I feel who's really holding back. I think when the term smooth jazz was coined, I think he tried so hard to fit into that market. I really think that he is playing less at a lower level than he was before. That's just my opinion. And I'm not trying to even criticize him for doing it. I mean, we're talking about record sales, and the thing is with Wes Montgomery and George Benson and other people, George Duke, I don't think they ever really held back so much. In other words, I think they were still playing well.
mhm.
I mean, there's no way that I could judge just how good these musicians are, but
Right.
I never got the sense that they were, I'm using this term holding back, okay? But when it comes to people like Lee Ritenour, and there are others who seem to give the impression that in order to sell records, they have to sound like lesser musicians. I don't even think
Right.
I said that right. I think you know what I'm trying to say. And
Right.
I guess I don't appreciate that because I don't think you have to dumb down the music. I think you can, as you said earlier, you can widen your audience or scope of who listens to your music, but I don't think you have to dumb it down. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I guess in a sense of saying really playing, I mean, I always say, well, you have to kind of define that term. I mean, because if you're playing, you know, pop music or jazz music, everybody's really playing and they're putting an intensity into it. But I think certain musics, the requirements, technical requirements may be higher, which I mean, I always think of when you play pop music, it's more than the actual performance of the music. I mean, what would what would and then let's go back years in of the pop music of the 50s. What would Chuck Berry be without doing the duck walk or whatever you want to call it when he played his guitar, and the performance where at the same time in the 50s, Wes playing, he sat down and played and and performed, and it was more. It's just a different experience. It's like when you hear sit down with Wes, it's just like a more of more of a cerebral or just like, hey, let's just chill and listen to Wes. Let's do his thing. Where hey, if you're not moving around dancing to Chuck Berry and doing what he's doing, and that all went along with what the whole uh, music thing throughout the years. I mean, I just use the 50s. That's the simplest example of it.
Sure. Sure.
Uh, um, I mean, what's James Brown without the music itself and the performance? Is Mary. I mean, when you hear his music, you think of him performing.
Yeah. And the thing with the cape and all that, that was
Okay,
all part of the performance. But
right.
his music was just as great as the visual aspect of what he was.
But where maybe you're not getting that much of a visual thing, even though I get a kick out of watching Coltrane or Miles perform, just to see them and see the intensity. It's not much of a visual thing. I remember years ago when the MTV hit and the whole video music thing was big, and they tried to translate that to jazz musicians, and a lot of people said it didn't translate. It somewhat failed because jazz musicians, they sit up and play.
Well,
And
that's really all you want. I really don't want to see people jumping around. I mean, not when it comes to jazz.
right,
I don't need to see. Okay, let's just pick a musician. Okay, we don't need to see George Duke playing or I don't know whoever playing, and then having go-go dancers. You know how they used to do in the '60s. The
right.
musician would be playing, and they have these go-go dancers in the background. I don't need to see that.
Well, yeah. Well, even rap music kind of copied that. They always had the dancers on the side. But anyway, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
different goal there. But when it comes to jazz, no, we don't need the distractions. And in fact, I went to the right before I left Chicago. I went to the jazz festival, and I'm definitely not going to mention this artist because I actually like this artist, and I hope she's still not like this. But she obviously watched too many booty girl videos and
Uh,
thought that was the kind of show that she had to put on at the Chicago Jazz Festival. And
right.
everybody acted as if, I mean, I know I was very offended. Certainly never expected to see that kind of behavior with a major jazz vocalist. I hope and pray that she's not acting like that anymore. But yeah, that was definitely unnecessary. Boy.
Right. 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 Well, so but there's the music. I think there's music to suit every situation, and the thing about it is, okay, you can play Wes's music, in an environment. You could be at work and you can have that, piped in, and people could be listening to Wendy, by Wes Montgomery, and
Mhm.
or A Day in a Life, and it fits in where they might not play James Brown
Uh,
because
maybe the Muzak version.
nothing against the Godfather Soul, but they might, unless they're gonna have him singing Georgia or
Yeah.
which he I have to admit I used to I'd be honest with you. I kind of looked at the ballad when James Brown would perform a ballad, and this was years ago. I used to say, come on, I want to hear something fast, I want to. But James Brown, he did a great performance of those ballads that he performed. I mean,
It's
they
Man's World. Oh
yeah,
man.
yeah. So I mean, and I was dead wrong years ago when I thought that. But it was just that was his forte. That was you came to see James Brown sing "Ain't It Funky Now,"
Yeah.
opposed to some standard tune. But he in his own right, after years of listening to that and having a better understanding of what was going on, that it was great performance just the same. So
Yeah. I want to ask you because you're a dad
right,
of a young teenager and a jazz fan and a jazz musician.
right,
I was having a discussion with a friend earlier today, and
uh-huh,
I was saying that the jazz radio station WNCU here in Durham, I was just giving my opinion that I felt that jazz radio, not necessarily WNCU, but any jazz radio station has to connect, or should at least make the attempt to connect to the young people who are into jazz. Because we always complain, oh, the young people, they don't know what jazz is. Of course, it's our fault for allowing jazz to be taken off the airways. You can't blame the kids. But I was just saying that if do you think that more kids would be into jazz if the jazz radio stations reached out to them? And you might say, how is that even possible? And before you answer the question, let me just explain that in Durham, at least, there are jazz programs at NCC, North Carolina Central University, Duke University, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and I think North Carolina State University also has a jazz program. There's high schools of jazz bands. I think Hillside High School, I know they had one. I don't know if they still do. But as far as the middle schools, Durham School of the Arts has a jazz band. Rogers Hurt has a jazz band, and there's another couple of schools that I think Riverside might have a jazz band. I'm not sure, Riverside High School. Right. But anyway, I was just saying, if the jazz radio stations, just as a natural course of events, reached out to the kids, visited them, have them come to the station and see the DJs in action, invite them to speak and whatnot. And of course, later they would brag to all their friends, yeah, I was on WNCU. You know. Don't you think that more kids would be interested in jazz if the jazz community reached out to them? Or do you think they'd say, oh, no, hip-hop forever? What do you think?
No, because, I mean, the thing about it is kids reach out to whatever is available, and they connect with each other. I mean, the whole thing about my daughter and what she likes is all social. It's what her friends listen to, and that's the foundation of the conversations. Like, oh, have you heard the latest from whoever? And that's the exchange that they have. I think, and especially at the age, yeah, she's 13, and I think as you get older and older, especially like the college age, then there's these small, subsets of that where people kind of branch out and try to be individualized. But I think that preteen, teenager, that age, they want to be like their friends, and those stations reach out to young people in a strong way with whatever they have. Pretty much a lot of it is pretty dumbed down. Mm-hmm. I hate to say it like that, but they hit them with the basic stuff. I mean, because my whole premise of this whole thing is my daughter, before she started, well, maybe even through like first grade, I pick her up from school. I had my, music playing, and I had Coltrane and Grant Green playing, and that's what she listened to.
That's cool. That's cool.
And she would say, well, she didn't know the names of the song. I remember when she was really small, she was maybe like 4. And she would say, Daddy, play da-da-da-da. And I was like, what? And she was talking about The Thumb by Wes. Dun, 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 dun,
oh, that's cute.
And so she liked that song because it had a little, and she was into that. And then she liked certain things because that's what I was playing in the car all the time. That's when cool. She started first grade, it started to change because other kids were listening to other things, and it didn't happen overnight. So it's really those radio stations market to the kids. I remember almost to the point where it changed. She went to a summer camp, and one of the things they would do while at lunchtime, they would listen to the radio. And one of the camp counselors, she was maybe a college kid, and she turned on Kiss FM, which is a local pop station here. And she was like, Dad, I just love Kiss FM. And so that was what she was about all the time. And wow. Every time we get in the car, I would turn on my West or some Train or some whatever, and she would say, Daddy, can we listen to Kiss FM? And I was like, I don't even know if my radio even works anymore. I was always playing my music, and I didn't really care what was on the radio. I mean, we have a jazz station here, but has a very weak signal. It's in Long Beach, and I can't get it all the time. But I would just play the stuff I liked, and I went for a long time without listening to a lot of stuff, which is pretty bad. But
It's not bad. I mean, you
at
like
a
what you
certain
like.
age, well, I mean, I didn't even really make an effort. Well, at that time, a lot of internet radio stations were coming about, and I was more into that. And really, I found out a lot of stuff is pre-programmed, and you can just in with these satellite radio stations, you can get in and just tune in what you want. I can listen to say, I just want to hear bebop jazz guitarist, and that's all I could hear. And that's pretty narrow-minded in the sense that there's a lot of other stuff out there. So you have to. That's what I think the good things about DJs, at least in our day, not having a pre-programmed, computerized stuff. These guys were bringing their own personality to the station, and they were trying to educate you on what was happening with this scene. They were being fed through the record companies that were pursuing them. There's the whole thing with they have a newer artist on a label, and they're going to promote it to the DJs and say, hey, we got a new guy, play his stuff a few times, and then so we start listening to it. Well, I don't know how that works today.
I don't either. Not even in the jazz world. I assume they do the same thing. They send their CDs out to the music directors, I suppose.
Right. I mean, like, for example, to me, one of the shining stars of jazz today is Esperanza Spalding. She's seems like she's trying to do something this unique. She sings, she plays some of the stuff. I mean, like, her heroes were some of the jazz fusion guys. She was into Weather Report and stuff like that. And then she came out, and then she's not doing exactly that, but she's doing something that's based on it, and she's using her training that she got in school or wherever she went, and so she's trying to bring something to the music that's unique, and it has a youthfulness to it. It has her slant on it, and it's not exactly what was done before. So that kind of person I appreciate,
and I would think that the jazz DJs on the radio should probably. I've heard some people talk against her because for some reason some older people don't like it when young people try to do something different with their music, with jazz.
Right. Well, I don't think she's. Yeah.
I applaud it. I mean, I'm a DJ, and there's a lot of really bad music out there, but there's a lot of great music out there that's straight pop. And I think anytime that you can get the kids who actually like music and not just want to listen to what everybody else is listening to. I mean, just think about it. There are always going to be talented kids out there, kids who are drawn to music, kids who are better than the other kids at music. And for them, the ordinary rap and hip hop is just not enough. And those are the kind of kids I would want to appeal to in terms of getting them to listen to jazz. And I would want someone like Miss Spalding to help them discover jazz, the new stuff and the old stuff.
Right, and some people tend to, and it happens when you get older, when there's up and coming players that can play and that have what it takes, and then when they do something a little different, they're not accepted because it's not the way it was done before, and that's totally against what I think jazz was about, or any music was about. It's always about change, and years ago I always tried to say, well, okay, when is it jazz? When do we put that label on? And it's just a label. It doesn't change what it is, and people can do what they want to do. You can't sit down and record something in the middle of it say, wait a minute, that's not jazz. I have to stop.
I've gone too far.
Right. So whatever it is, I mean, you just do what you actually do that you like. I mean, I always said, and I tried to define this, and I imagine guys like Wynton Marsalis or whatever may argue with me, and I used to say this. I used to say, jazz, the essence of it, you have to have the element of swing. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
That makes sense.
Do you agree with that?
I don't have a problem with that. Although not all jazz really swings. Not
right.
all.
Well, that's what I was getting at. Okay, well, what about when you play a bossa nova? What if you play, when Stan Getz played, with Joe Beam or whatever, and they did, is that not jazz?
Ornette doesn't swing all the time, certainly.
Right. And some
He's
of them,
not trying to necessarily.
And if you want to get technical, there was some of those things where it had straight eights in it. It wasn't, it wasn't swing. It wasn't what Louis Armstrong exactly did. I mean, so is it not jazz? Well, see, those are the questions. Every time I try to hang a definition on it, I find something that I like that breaks that definition. So
it's hard to define it really, to have a real sharp distinctive line between jazz and pop or jazz and Latin or whatever. I wouldn't even try. I really wouldn't even try. I think that jazz is sometimes like race. Sometimes you just have to self-define. You've met people who say that being of African descent means this, and some people say no, it means that, and some people say, well, if you're mulatto or biracial, that means something different. You know what I mean? When it comes to jazz, I think sometimes you just have to self-define. I say if a person says, I am this, then you can't argue with them.
Well,
and if they see themselves as a certain way,
right.
To me that is what they are. And if a jazz person who might be playing something really just wild and off the wall and says, I'm a jazz musician, I'm not going to fight him.
Well, that thing you said about race is exactly, part of that came from that, because I remember years ago someone said, the whole, what you learn in school, at least in college, that there was only 3 races. And
oh, we didn't learn that at my school.
Okay, there's Caucasian, Negroid, and they had to break down, Caucasian, Negroid, and then Asian. So I know I'm gonna get a lot.
That does not account for everybody, though.
That's what So they said that there was, everything else is just a mixture of race and all that. But after saying that, is someone told me, said even those 3 definitions you can't prove them, because there's always an exception to that. So just like jazz, you said you can't really have a hard definition for race. I mean, and you can, looking at people, you can't really say what nationality they are. Just like in jazz music, you can't really say, well, I mean, if George Benson plays a Latin tune, is it still jazz? I mean, okay, I don't know.
Yeah.
Or so these definitions, I think what it is definitions and or labels that people put on things brings them a comfort level, because then they can put it where they want it. They can say, well, that's this, and this is what I like, and you can group things. It's a way of organizing it, and such as things across the world. It's just like, it's just a label. So I think later on, like guys like you mentioned, like George Duke, and especially those guys from that fusion era, they didn't really care. They and they didn't really care about those labels or the definition. They were playing what they wanted to play, and you know, it came out what it was. But I think that there's just all these labels. They're meaningless. They don't mean anything. But I think when you talk about jazz in the traditional sense, there's certain things that have to be there in terms of usually there's improvisation, right?
For me, what's important is a good song, starting off with a good melody. That's just me.
Well, it has to have a melody. Okay, that's another thing. It's got to have a melody. There's usually improvisations. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's a thing like there's elements to it, but maybe they're all not present every time. You know, and okay. So, like you know, like I said about Louis Armstrong, swing. I mean, he invented that. I mean, well, what I got was that he heard Buddy Bolden and went out and copied what he heard, and you know, I always thought about, and Louis Armstrong to me is like, you know, as far as that music is concerned, look at the time he came up in, and he figured out something out of almost nothing in terms of there was no recordings. He had just to go hear these people and remember what he heard. Look how much is easier.
Wow, I never even thought of it that way. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, look at so look what he created out of all that. I mean, and there were no recordings. And now, you know, a person can go on YouTube and learn how to play.
That's true. That's very true. Now, I want to ask you this, because you live in California. Mm-hmm. Miles Davis, before he died, he was making some bridges between the hip-hop world and the jazz world. And I'm wondering, you know, with your being out there in California where things are usually, aren't you a little ahead of the curve in California? I don't know if that's still true.
I don't know. Maybe California is, but this guy.
Yeah. Maybe not you. Okay. Maybe but not. What I'm trying to ask, though, are people still trying to make connections between today's music and jazz, which to me is still today's music, but just of a different flavor?
Well, in what sense? You mean like connected, like trying to?
You know, like Miles is doing stuff with Prince, and people are trying to meld jazz and hip hop together, which I think would have brought more young people to jazz and vice versa. And here I'm 57. I listen to hip hop. I don't like most of it. There's a lot of good stuff out there, but I can't say that I'm a gigantic fan of all of hip hop. But I have an open mind in that I can listen to some hip hop and say, "Ooh, that's pretty cool." And as a DJ, I have to play some because I'm paid to.
Right.
But do you see musicians out in California where everything is supposedly hipper? And do you see hip hop guys and jazz guys mixing it up?
I'm probably the worst person to ask that.
Okay. You're old school.
Yeah, I want to, you know. I mean, as far as music is concerned, yeah, I'm pretty old-fashioned, and I'm proud of that. I mean,
there's nothing wrong with it. But don't you have some friends that are that Bostic fella? Isn't he kind of combining?
Well, I mean, I guess he's doing what he's doing. I haven't talked to him in a while, but I guess he's doing what he's doing, and I believe his thing was just like anyone else, just to use the influences that you have and come up with something that you're on, and don't worry about the labels. that that are associated with that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just do what you do, and because I mean, just like he and I, Jewett, we both like Jimi Hendrix, and so we never saw okay Hendrix, Wes. I mean, it's all good music. It's he was trying to do
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Um, so and if you can bridge that somehow, I don't see it, but maybe if you can, yeah, go for it, make it happen. I mean, I think the most important thing is just to draw from your influences the things that you like, and don't be limited. Don't say, oh, we can't, I can't do that because that's not jazz or that's not R&B if I add this.
Mm.
I actually I listen to, if you really listen to a lot of 70s R&B, especially the stuff that was in the early 70s, you listen to the chord changes. It wasn't much difference between that and some of the stuff that Miles was doing in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, chord-wise, rhythmically it was something different, but it was kind of the same thing. I mean, the influence.
I was listening to something, I can't think of the name of it, but it's by a group called Slave from the 70s.
Right, which is hardcore funk.
It's totally funk, but those chords are so gorgeous. He was playing some nice jazz chords.
Right,
Definitely.
right. Which, why couldn't you
And there's a lot of music from the 70s, I mean, like funk, where the chords are just beautiful.
But here's one thing that I always want to touch on that I see that I think one of the fundamental things that I think people kind of fall short of enjoying jazz in the traditional, the more traditional side of it, which I think you should get into that just like anything else. But and this just translates not just to music, but if it doesn't have a backbeat to it, people immediately don't relate to it. And you really think about everything today has a rhythmic backbeat, where jazz music, and I think it was born out of what the instruments, the way they played that then, it didn't really have to define the strong beats,
Mm-hmm.
because they were there.
Jazz has good beats, though.
Yeah, no, it has good beats, but you got to realize what in jazz, what are the fundamental rhythms that you always hear? This you have to hold on to. What are they? The 2 and the 4.
Oh, okay.
Those are the weak
That's
beats.
good. Okay.
Those are the weak beats, right?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
1 and 3 just doesn't work for me.
But see, you really think about, let's look at disco, and I know I'm going out on a limb. I know people are going to
That's okay.
blame me for this, but going out on a limb, it's emphasizing the strong beats to tell people, okay, this is where the beat is. Where in swing, you really don't have to do that.
Hmm.
And you really think about it, you got to think about it. That music, swing was made to dance to.
Yeah. In fact, people did used to. Well, from what I read, people were dancing to jazz until bebop came along.
Right. But and I'm somewhat asking the question, why, if I put on some music and it doesn't have a heavy kick drum, a heavy snare, heavy kick on 1 and 3, and it's not appealing. It doesn't have, there's certain things, though, when they produce these records and they make it, there's certain things that they're using to draw people in. When they hear a beat, they say, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. They know, dances and things are based on the music that was created at that time.
Sure.
if you really think about it, you listen to some of the pop music that we came up with, that there were dances that went right with that style of playing that was out then. I mean,
exactly, yeah. The dances that went along with the songs. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
There was Mary, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, and I don't know what I'm saying this because I noticed that, see, I can listen to music without a backbeat, and and it's swinging.
Mm-hmm.
The jazz music, the way the way Max Roach played the drums, it swings.
Mm-hmm.
And that 2 and 4. I mean, when I play the guitar, there's one thing I learned. There was an organ player that used to. He was my neighbor when I stayed when I first around the first time I came to LA. He was an organ player in LA. His name was Tom Tanya, and one day he was at home. He practiced at home. He had a piano, but he was practicing and he was playing some tunes, and I noticed that he had the metronome. Usually people turn the metronome and they go 1, 2, 3, 4. It's going
Sure.
like that, and he had it clicking on 2 and 4. And he says, I said, why do you do that? He said, that's because when you playing the drummer, you hit a hi-hat,
Oh, yeah.
2 and 4, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You hit a hi-hat on 2 and 4. And that's the way you feel it. Because the strong beats, you don't really need, you should let those, everyone's going to hit the strong beats where they hit them. And there should be a little freedom there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this theory about it that probably I'm not able to explain, but those those weak beats, the 2 and the 4, everyone needs to fall where they fall. Let the drummer put those into place, and it lets the music kind of flow. It has it's able to do, you're able to play the way you want to play, but it also syncs everyone up. So,
but what you're talking about, not accepting different types of music or different styles of the same type of music. I really think you're just used to what you're used to. If
right.
listening to music without a backbeat, if you're used to backbeat, it's going to be very disorienting. I remember reading about or hearing about when Stravinsky put out The Rite of Spring.
Mm-hmm.
Classical music fans, they weren't hip to the what would you call his melodies? Avant-garde,
Mm-hmm.
abstract type melodies. They said fights broke out, and they were totally freaking out. And that was the classical music audience. He was bringing to them an element of music that they had not yet experienced. So
Mm-hmm.
I just think, even though we're using labels, we're talking about jazz and whatnot, I think that any music that's unfamiliar or any music that has unfamiliar elements is going to be rejected by a lot of people.
Right.
Unless it's presented in such a way that those differences are made hip, or if they're introduced by someone who is hip, or hip to the people you're trying to
Right.
to
Well,
get.
I mean, it has so much to do with the personality, and
Yeah.
I think in all music that exists, what would Miles be without the personality that he was? I mean, that was part of it. I mean, what would Coltrane be? The music he played in the image that he projected is kind of Mary. And
It's very true. It's very true. And
uh,
that goes for any artist that I can think of almost. Their persona. Did Celia Cruz really have to wear those outlandish wigs like Patti LaBelle? No, but she was being Celia Cruz. And I don't think it helped her music, but it helped solidify her persona, showed her the flamboyance of her personality, and it matched her singing style.
Well, I know guys that base their whole thing, especially the Coltrane period with Alice Coltrane, and the way that Alice looked, and
Mm-hmm.
the whole thing. Train was getting into being a vegetarian, and his spirituality, and then, Love Supreme, all that stuff, him playing, what was that? He played the tune, My Favorite Things, for like 30 minutes or something like that, and just blowing like crazy. It just all was just a vibe that just all came together, and people got into that. And I know people who base their lives on that whole Coltrane thing, and
isn't there in California a church dedicated to the music of John Coltrane?
Probably, I think I've heard of something like that, or it's there is something like that. So just think how powerful that music was, and what he did, and how different it was from his life in the early years. I mean, it was just so different.
Yeah.
And so he built this thing, and it's just like the whole thing with Ravi Shankar, and that whole relationship, studying Indian music, and and then it affected guys like John McLaughlin, and his whole Mahavishnu
Orchestra, yeah.
Right, yeah, it's just all out there, and it was just a whole direction built on that. Which
do you remember watching TV shows in the 70s? All the shows had tablas in it, as
right,
like in the background. I mean, you didn't hear the whole thing with the sirats and the sitars and all that, but they always had tablas. That really, for some reason, that really caught on with the musicians.
Well, that reminds me of a thing that was in Chicago. I don't know if you remember this, or if you ever knew about it, but there was a restaurant / like music workshop called Transitions East in the 70s.
Vaguely remember. Vaguely.
It was like I think it was on Cottage Grove, but anyway, I used to go there, with our mutual friend Morris Hamilton. We used to go there.
Oh yeah.
And because he was a vegetarian, and they had good food, and we used to see this guy named Phil Coran. Phil Coran had a
yeah, I met him. Yeah.
Yeah, and Phil Coran, I was told, taught Maurice White how to play the kalimba, or had some influence on him in a way. And he played the electric kalimba, because it sounded like an electric piano almost. Mm-hmm. But they used to perform there, and they had, guys that were into the diet. And I remember from there, I never was a vegetarian, but I remember I bought this book. They recommend, they say, oh, you're Back to Eating, which is, about, diet and stuff like that. Mm. But
are you saying Eden or Eaton?
Eden, like
Back to Eden. Okay.
Yeah. I think there's a book called Back to Eden or whatever. But anyway, but the music and the food and the whole, because like they got to realize this was maybe like the mid to late 70s, and they were still. You remember, like in the 60s, everyone was wearing the dashikis and things like that.
Sure. And they were all made in India.
These guys are still wearing theirs, So,
okay.
And the whole thing was Transitions East was about moving. It was not going back to Africa. It was Pan-Africanism,
right.
Meaning that uniting Black people or Africans in the world. And so that was their motive. They said we need to unite with Black people in the East and all that stuff. And it was pretty cool. I mean, I went there a few times and checked out. And of course, it was music. The music was great.
Yeah.
I mean, and it was some serious players. I think, I'm not sure, but I think Phil Coran may be still around. I'm not sure. And he had, there's one other thing. He had ties to Sun Ra.
I'm not surprised somehow.
Right. So
space is the place.
I think I remember that. You know, I think he played with Sun Ra or something like that. I may be wrong. I know I'll be corrected, but I think I read that.
Now we're gonna have to go in a second, but I have to tell you that a few years ago, now
Mm-hmm.
Durham is a wild place. Durham is cool. Like I said, we actually have two jazz stations locally, which
Uh-huh.
is the one in North Carolina Central University, WNCU. My show, Radio Skywriter, is on that station.
Uh-huh.
Shaw University also has a jazz station, but Durham is, well, it's a college town, so it's liberal and fun and whatnot.
Uh-huh.
We actually had a day dedicated to Sun Ra. Can you believe it? Where
Wow.
people came dressed in outlandish homemade outfits, and there was actually a parade for Sun Ra. It was wild. I mean,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just never saw anything like it. And people were dressed up like spacemen. And I think there was an art exhibit. I think it was all to commemorate this, or rather to bring attention to this art exhibit that was centered around Sun Ra. It was crazy. We
You
need
know,
more fun stuff like that in this world.
yeah, and the whole mystical thing around it, and you know, see the funny part of that I get is, you know, he was just a man, a black man from Mississippi.
Mississippi.
I think he was from Mississippi, somewhere in the
Yeah,
South.
definitely, definitely. Which I thought
And
was
he
really
came
funny.
and he took that whole thing and built it up and but
Masterful marketing, which is something that jazz needs now.
right.
Actually, anything good, anything truly good needs masterful marketing.
Right. Yeah, and the key to it all. The marketing. There's money behind it to get it to the people, and people will like almost anything that that has appeal that connects them to other people. And that's going back to the conversation about my daughter. It connects her to her friends, what she listens to, and you just think about it. Our connection is through music, and so we share, you know, even though the things we like are not the same, but we share a connection through that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it could be anything. It could be jazz or whatever, but it's what's out there and what's accessible. If they make it easier to get to, or if that's what's on the table first, or what's promoted, that's what people are going to latch onto. So you turn on the radio, what do you hear? That's what people go for.
I agree, and you know when it comes to now, I don't want to pit hip hop versus jazz, but again, thinking of kids who are really into music. Now, I would guess that most people listen to, like you said, music that connects them to their friends. They don't necessarily want to play music themselves. They just want to enjoy it. Now, there are always going to be young people who actually want to do music. And
Right.
those are the kids that I think that the jazz community should aim for. Because I have met, because like I said, I'm a DJ, and I have met so many young people who are really tired of rap. And they say there's just, and these are probably the kids who are probably more talented, and these would be the kids who would be taking piano lessons like back in the day, kids who
Right.
would be, starting bands and stuff. But of course, rap doesn't really encourage that because that's just not what rap is all about. And I've had so many kids who say they wish there was some other kind of music out there because they're really tired of rap. I'm like, there is more music than just rap, did you know?
Right.
And I really think that if you don't have to start out with Benny Goodman, you don't have to start out with Lionel Hampton. I mean, you don't have to start back so far. I think it's possible to bring kids in right where they are. If it happens to be smooth jazz, as long as it's not the real schmaltzy stuff, that's fine. I mean, I don't have any problem with,
Oh yeah.
yeah,
I
anything that
yeah.
brings kids to a more sophisticated level of music. When I say
I mean,
sophisticated, I don't mean highbrow. Just something with chords and melodies.
right. I mean, my parents listened to jazz, or actually, if you really think about it, I'm a product of that. Where, I mean, most of what I listened to in my when I was 7, 8, or 9, was popular music. But then I was open to a lot of different things, and I heard my parents, my dad and my uncle. My uncle was a real influence in terms of my music. He was into Wes and stuff like that, and I used to listen to records, but I was just like that too. I was listening to whatever my friends were listening to, and it was good music. I mean, it was the pop music of that day, but I was still open to it. And then when I got in high school, I started trying to seek out other things, and my friends were looking at. Now, being that I was a musician is a unique situation because we're always trying to search for something.
Definitely.
Searching. I mean, I got exposed to Duke Ellington because I was in the stage band, and they brought the charts for that, and we had to play it, and so
impressive.
Right. I mean, on my prom, a bunch of us after a prom, we went to see Count Basie.
Wow, nice prom.
So, I mean, because I played an instrument, so that I had been educated a bit, and I understood the value of it. I remember seeing it. They had a thing on. Didn't Duke die in '74 or something like that?
Mid-70s. I don't know the exact.
Right.
No, it
And
wouldn't be the mid-70s. No, late '70s. I'm not sure, but go ahead. I know. I think he shares a birthday with my sister. Isn't his birthday like April 25th or something like that?
Right. Yeah. I think I remember seeing a special on him, and I think it was like when he died, around the time he died, and I remember like saying, "Wow, this man throughout the world has gotten so much respect." And I don't think I knew him the way I know him now, because from reading and stuff like that. But
Well, I remember when he died being alarmed because I remember big fusses being made over certain rock musicians who died,
right,
and I didn't see the huge outpouring of grief and news anchors running all over the place when Duke Ellington died. I remember being kind of alarmed about that because they would always showcase the rock guys who died, especially people like Elvis, and you know
right,
how crazy people went when people like Elvis Presley died, and of course
right,
Jimi Hendrix, and, all
right,
those guys. But I didn't see any great excitement when Duke Ellington died. I remember being really disturbed by that because I felt that his music was far more universal. Well, I guess it depends. I mean, Elvis, of course, he brought, I guess, white folks to rock and roll with soul music. So
right.
we can't fault him, and we can't say, we can't take anything away from him. Certainly don't want to do that.
Yeah,
But for those of us who are into jazz, yeah, Duke was.
right.
Ellington was so amazing that when he died, he didn't get the accolades and the press that I felt he should have. That's just me.
Right. Yeah. But I remember after seeing that, I was really like, wow, he's just so well respected throughout the world.
Yeah.
And it left an impression on me.
Hmm.
And then, I started to seek out, music that he wrote.
Hmm.
And it was, it's, he, I think as an individual, he was well respected, not only in the music world, just for his accomplishment, what he represented, those things that brought him, a lot of attention.
Yeah. Now I'm going to mention one more story, then we're going to go.
Okay,
Do you remember WBEE Radio, Charles Sherrill's station?
is that Daddy O'Daly? Is that
Daniel Daly was on. He might have started out there because I know that was my favorite DJ. I actually found
that's AM, right?
some clips. WBEE was on 1570 AM, and it was from. It wasn't really Chicago. It was near Chicago. It was in, I believe, Indiana somewhere.
Yeah,
But
that was the best jazz station in Chicago for a long time.
oh yeah, definitely. But Mr. Sherrill, I don't know if he's still around. If he is, he's 80 or so. But the one story I wanted to say was that they used to do jazz profiles on WBEE and the late WBEE, and I remember vaguely. So this must have been like 40 years ago, and they were doing a profile on Dizzy Gillespie,
Hmm.
and they were saying again, this was I was a young person. I don't remember word for word what was said, but
Right.
I do remember being impressed that Dizzy Gillespie arrived in some country, don't know which, somewhere,
Hmm.
and they were at war.
Wow.
They heard that Dizzy Gillespie was there. They stopped the war.
Wow.
Both sides went to hear Dizzy Gillespie. That
Okay.
sounds crazy, but jazz is so fabulous that it actually stopped the war, at least for a while. Because after he left, they resumed fighting, killing each other. But I was thinking, if any kind of music can do that, that's my kind of music.
Right. Well,
And
yeah.
with that, let's sign off because we've
Right.
been on for about almost an hour and a half. But
Okay.
but I want to welcome you back, Wade Thames.
Oh, I didn't know I left.
Explain your name because when I first met you, it was Wade Thames. Explain how that happened, how it worked.
Okay. Well, the my father, when he grew up in Mississippi, well, he left Mississippi when he was very young. But he said that I think he was 9 years old when he left, and he said when we were in Mississippi, we pronounced our name Thames.
And it's
And
spelled like the river in
yeah, yeah.
London.
I
Yeah.
think phonetically they say
Yes.
Temz. You know, is that
Okay.
that's And he said that when we moved to Chicago, everyone said that's not the way you pronounce the name, and they said it's Thames. And
He
what
let people he didn't know correct him.
well, you know what it is different regions. It's just like uh, you know Dusable in Chicago, where Dusab, and if you were in France, you would say
Mm.
Dusab. There's no L,
And
you know.
please
Yeah, the
don't let
L.
people please don't let people know that in Chicago we
Or,
would pronounce Goethe Goethe Street as Goethe.
okay, or just like and it's in Egypt, it's Cairo, but if you're in the southern part of Illinois, it's Cairo,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. I went to like I said, I went to Talia College. There was an Arab, Alabama. There. Anyway,
So,
but
but
let's
there
go.
was
But now you pronounce your name Thames because that's how it
well,
started.
my I remember talking to my English teacher in high school, Miss Eckhart, and I said, "What's the correct way to pronounce it?" She said, "You can pronounce your name any way you want to." And so and my brother and I we decided that we were going to pronounce our name Thames. So
Well,
and it's hard
that's what
to
it's supposed to
get
be.
people,
Yeah.
to change. I didn't go around saying, "Hey, don't say my name like that." I'll respond to it either way. But and
Especially if it's a
it's kind
call
of
for
like
a gig.
or here's like that funny one, like that movie. I think it was Coming to America where they said the joke they talking about when Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay changed his name to Muhammad Ali. They said, "I'm not calling him Muhammad Ali. His mama named Clay. I'm calling him Clay." So
Oh boy. Okay.
so I mean. I didn't make a big deal about it, but most of the people in California know me by the name Thames, and my father even they where they live now they've moved, and my father he says Thames because
Oh,
that was
okay.
the original way it was pronounced, and I only noticed that in Chicago, and there were like five other kids that I went to high school with. We all had the same last name and we weren't related,
Hmm.
besides my brother
Yeah.
and I,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And they said thanks.
Okay. Well, let's sign off there, Wade. It was really fun talking with you.
All right.
And I hope you get more gigs and more jazz happening in your life, and I hope I do too as well.
All right.
Okay, folks. Now, if you would like to be a guest on TV Skywriter, I'm always looking for musicians and creative people like visual artists and all kinds of folks, writers, authors, whatever, quilters, I don't care. If you're creative, come on the show. Just send an email to Durham Skywriter at gmail.com. I'd love to have you on the show. So you have a great week, and I'll see you next Sunday. See you
All right.
later. And I'll see you later there, Wade.
All right.
Thames.
All
Okay.
right.
See ya.